Dr. Donovan Harper was once a beacon of hope in the medical community. A prodigy with an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, his future was as bright as the operating lamps he wielded. But tragedy struck when a car accident claimed the life of his beloved fiancée, Anya, a brilliant biochemist. Consumed by grief and a desperate need to reverse the cruel hand of fate, Harper abandoned the path of conventional medicine. Driven by a single-minded obsession, he retreated into his laboratory, transforming it into a macabre sanctuary where he could explore the boundaries of life and death. The stench of decay was a constant, a low hum in the background of Dr. Donovan Harper's world. It clung to his lab coat, seeped into his bones, and colored his dreams with hues of crimson and bile green. He was a man immersed in the language of flesh, its poetry of growth and decay. The sterile white of his laboratory was a stark contrast to the crimson tapestry he wove within its walls. The air in the laboratory was thick with the scent of antiseptic and decay, a sickly sweet perfume that clung to the senses like a phantom. The constant hum of industrial machinery provided a relentless backdrop to the discord of the lab, a discordant symphony of beeping monitors, the hiss of escaping gas, and the rhythmic thud of Harper's movements. The metallic tang of blood was a persistent taste on Harper's tongue, a bitter reminder of the work at hand. Today, the centerpiece of his canvas was Alice, a young woman once vibrant with life, now reduced to a porcelain doll with a heart of raw meat. Her skin, a patchwork of scars and bruises, stretched taut over exposed muscle, a canvas for Harper's morbid artistry. He stood over her, his eyes alight with a macabre fascination as he scrutinized his work. The operation table, a cold, stainless steel altar, bore witness to countless atrocities. Its surface was etched with the ghosts of past experiments, a grim hall of fame for Harper's twisted genius. Restraints, like metallic spiders, clung to Alice's limbs, holding her captive in a world of pain. Her eyes, wide with terror, were the only part of her that seemed untouched by the surgeon's blade. Harper reached for a scalpel, the glint of steel mirroring the cold determination in his eyes. He moved with the precision of a ballet dancer, each cut a calculated stroke, a brushstroke on the canvas of human flesh. The hiss of cauterizing iron mingled with the wet thud of tissue parting, a symphony of grotesque beauty to his ears. Alice's screams were a distant melody, a counterpoint to the main theme of his creation. He ignored them, lost in the rhythm of his work. With each layer peeled away, he delved deeper into the mystery of human resilience, the boundaries of pain and endurance. He had begun as a man of science, driven by a thirst for knowledge. But somewhere along the line, the pursuit of truth had morphed into an obsession, a dark addiction. The thrill of discovery had been replaced by the heady rush of creation, of shaping life and death into grotesque sculptures. He paused, his scalpel hovering above Alice's exposed ribcage. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes, a ghost of the man he once was, but it was quickly extinguished by the flames of his obsession. He pressed on, the scalpel biting into flesh. A new organ was emerging, a pulsating mass of red and white, a grotesque bloom in the wasteland of Alice's body. It was a marvel, a testament to his genius. But as he gazed upon his creation, a cold dread crept into his heart. He was losing control. The creature within Alice was growing stronger, its demands more insistent. It was no longer a mere experiment but a force of nature, a monstrous entity with a will of its own. Symbolically, the lab had become a microcosm of society, a sterile environment where unchecked ambition had mutated into a monstrous creation. Harper, once a beacon of hope, had transformed into a shadow of his former self, a tragic figure consumed by a desire for power and knowledge that ultimately led to his downfall. The creature, a grotesque amalgamation of human and something far more sinister, represented the destructive potential of unchecked progress. Harper stepped back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was a creator, but he was also a prisoner, trapped in a world of his own making. And as he watched the creature stir within Alice, he realized with a cold dread that the monster he had brought into being might be his undoing. The creature within Alice stirred. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within her, a sound that was both animal and inhuman. The creature, with its unnatural abilities and insatiable hunger, could wreak havoc on an unsuspecting public. Her eyes, once filled with terror, now burned with a cold, predatory intelligence. Harper felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of fear and exhilaration. He had unleashed something beyond his control, a force of nature that threatened to consume him. The restraints holding Alice in place began to strain, metal creaking under the immense pressure exerted from within. Harper's heart pounded in his ears as he watched the impossible happen. Her bones, once rigid structures, seemed to liquefy, stretching and contorting with unnatural ease. The creature within was breaking free. With a deafening crash, the restraints snapped, sending Alice tumbling to the floor. She landed with a heavy thud, but there was no pain in her movements, only a raw, primal energy. She rose slowly, her body transforming before Harper's eyes. Her skin turned a sickly shade of gray, and veins pulsed like angry rivers beneath the surface. Her limbs elongated, ending in sharp, clawed digits. Harper backed away, his mind racing. He had created a monster, a being of pure, unadulterated evil. And now, it was coming for him. Alice, or whatever she had become, moved towards him with a predatory grace. Her eyes, now completely black, locked onto him with a single-minded focus. Harper could feel his blood run cold. There was no escape, no place to hide. He was trapped in his own hell, a prisoner in the cage he had built. As she closed the distance between them, Harper reached for a scalpel, his last line of defense. But as he raised the weapon, he knew it was futile. This was no longer a scientific experiment. It was a battle for survival, a fight against the very essence of his creation. The creature lunged, its claws outstretched. Harper raised the scalpel, but before he could strike, it was knocked from his hand. With a sickening crunch, Alice's claws tore into his flesh. Pain exploded through his body, but he refused to yield. He fought back, his hands clawing at the creature's grotesque form. The laboratory became a battlefield, a crimson canvas painted with their struggle. Glass shattered, equipment was overturned, and the stench of blood filled the air. Harper was losing strength, his body battered and broken. But he fought on, driven by a primal instinct for survival. As he felt his consciousness fading, he looked into Alice's eyes, or rather, the abyss that had replaced them. And in that final moment, he saw a reflection of his own madness, a twisted mirror of the soul he had lost. He had sought to conquer the limits of the human body, to transcend the boundaries of life and death, but all he had achieved was to create a living embodiment of his own depravity. With a final, desperate effort, Harper managed to free himself from the creature's grasp. Stumbling backwards, he collided with a table, sending jars of formaldehyde crashing to the floor. The chemicals mingled with the blood, creating a noxious cloud that burned his eyes and lungs. Through the haze, he saw Chong, the detective who had been doggedly pursuing him, her gun drawn and aimed at the monster that Alice had become. Her face was a mask of horror and determination, a reflection of the chaos that now ruled his world. "End it," he croaked, his voice barely audible over the creature's roars. "End this madness." Chong hesitated, her gaze flicking from Harper to the creature that had once been a woman. She knew what he had done, the unspeakable acts he had committed in the name of science. But as she looked into the void that was Alice's gaze, she understood that this was no longer a question of right or wrong. It was about survival, about ending the nightmare that had been born in this chamber of horrors. With a heavy heart, she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the lab like a death knell. The creature staggered, then fell, its body convulsing as the bullet tore through its malformed tissue. Alice, or what was left of her, lay still, the light in her eyes extinguished. Harper slumped to the floor, his life's work destroyed before his eyes. He was broken, a man whose obsession had led to his downfall. But as he watched the pool of his own blood spreading across the cold tiles, he realized that he had one final revelation to face. The true cost of his quest for power was not just the lives of his subjects, but his own humanity. Detective Chung approached cautiously, her eyes on the twitching mass of flesh that was once Alice. Detective Chung was no stranger to the grotesque, but the scene before her was a new level of depravity. As she surveyed the carnage, her mind was already working, piecing together the puzzle. She called for forensics to document every detail, every stain, every piece of tissue. Her investigation began with the missing persons reports. A pattern emerged: young women, similar physical attributes, vanishing without a trace. Their photos stared back at her, a haunting gallery of lost souls. One name stood out: Sarah Miller, reported missing 6 months prior. There were whispers on the streets about a doctor with a penchant for the unusual, a man who promised miracle cures but left patients scarred, both physically and mentally. As Chung delved deeper, she discovered a network of shady clinics and underground laboratories connected to Harper. Each location was a horror show, a testament to his twisted experiments. There were remnants of other victims, their bodies marked with the same grotesque surgical scars. A ledger, found hidden in Harper's office, contained a chilling list of names, a catalog of human experimentation. The puzzle was slowly coming together. Harper wasn't just a mad scientist. He was a predator, a puppet master orchestrating a macabre symphony of pain and suffering. Chung was determined to bring him to justice, not just for the victims, but for the city as a whole. This monster had to be stopped before he could claim any more lives. She felt a mix of relief and revulsion as she observed the creature's final moments. This was the culmination of her tireless pursuit, the monster at the end of a trail of butchery and pain. The lab was silent now, save for the shallow gasps of Harper's breathing. The air was thick with the smell of formaldehyde and the coppery tang of blood. The detective knelt beside him, her eyes searching his for any shred of remorse. "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the horror she had witnessed. Harper looked up at her, his face a mask of agony. "For knowledge," he whispered, his eyes glazing over as his life slipped away. "For power. To push the boundaries of what we can become." Chung felt a coldness seep into her heart. This was not the victory she had imagined. Instead, it was a grim reminder of the depths to which human beings could sink in the pursuit of something they could never fully comprehend. She had seen the worst of humanity, and it was a reflection of the very society she had sworn to protect. As she called for backup, she knew that the city outside would not learn of this nightmare. The facility would be sanitized, the evidence erased, and the people would go on living their lives, oblivious to the horrors that lurked beneath the surface. But she would carry the memory with her, a scar on her soul that would never fade. The sirens grew louder in the distance, a mournful wail that seemed to echo the final cries of Alice and all the others who had suffered in this chamber of horrors. As the darkness closed in, Chung made a silent vow to bring those responsible to justice, to ensure that no one else would have to endure the same fate. The story of Dr. Donovan Harper and his twisted experiments would remain a secret buried deep within the bowels of the city's underbelly. But the legacy of his madness lived on, in the whispers of the night and the shadows that danced in the corners of every alley. And in the heart of the detective who had borne witness to his ultimate creation, a creature that transcended life and death, a testament to the limits of human endurance and the unspeakable horrors that lurk in the most twisted of minds. Detective Chung emerged from the facility, her eyes haunted by the images seared into her retina. The discordance of the city's streets was a stark contrast to the eerie silence she had left behind. She could still hear the echoes of Alice's inhuman growls, the smell of burning flesh clinging to her nostrils like a malignant specter. Her mission was not one of triumph but of sorrowful closure, a grim reminder of the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men. Her journey into the depths of Harper's madness had left her questioning the very fabric of her reality. The line between progress and monstrosity had blurred, leaving her to navigate the murky waters of moral ambiguity. The city she knew was a facade, a mask hiding the grotesque truths that writhed just beneath the surface. As she stood there, the weight of her discovery threatening to crush her, she felt a new resolve take root. The monsters of the night had a new face, one that she knew all too well. It was her duty to ensure that no one else would fall prey to the likes of Harper. The world had to be protected from the horrors that lurked in the shadows, from the madness that sought to redefine the very essence of what it meant to be human. Chang knew that she could never forget. The eyes of the creature, a void of blackness that had once been Alice, would haunt her dreams. The thirst for knowledge had turned to a rabid hunger for power, and it had consumed them all. The monsters weren't just the creatures that Harper had spawned. They were the men and women who had allowed such horrors to fester in the dark. With a heavy heart, she turned her back on the facility, the doors sliding shut with a final, resounding thud. Her eyes were dry, her expression stoic, but inside, she was a tempest of rage and grief. The battle was over, but the war against the monsters in human skin had just begun. The city's streets stretched out before her, a labyrinth of potential horrors. But she was ready, her eyes sharp, her mind focused. For in the heart of the detective, there burned a fierce determination to right the wrongs, to protect the defenseless, and to slay the monsters that lurked in the shadows. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing to stay updated with our latest stories, give us a like if you want to see more, and drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts.